And we're live. Hello again. Here it's Win with the marvelous,
Linda Ventures Nichols.
the Nichols team, along with the marvelous Stina Marie and Dorit Carlson. Welcome, ladies. This is going to be fun.
Yay.
Thank you.
Okay, so high vibe conversation about consensuality. New word in our part of the world. Linda, won't you start it off?
Oh yeah, I don't know. I thought it was a consensuality and thought I had actually made up a new word and then looked it up and was like, okay, consensuality. Okay. What we were talking about though is consent, and that is nothing new in our world. So Stina is kind of the expert of communication and consent and even teaching consent to children, and she has some really unique ways and ideas about that would be definitely new to the world at large, I would say. So Stina, what do you have to say? I know it's like your rant and pet peeve that is not going on.
Yeah, I love this conversation because I believe that our sexuality is a part of us through our whole lives, and that our children, the way that we can teach them at what we consider, age appropriate stages, about their sexuality actually doesn't start with what we think about being sexual at all. It just starts with their bodies, and it starts with teaching them what feels like a yes and what feels like a no, so that they can express that clearly and have it respected. Because as parents and at home, when we create repetition to our kids that their no is respected and their yes is respected and that they are heard, they develop a really strong sense of consent is like a truth. It's like a thing you can believe in, so that when someone does not respect their consent or does not ask them for consent, their alarm bells go off, right? Or there's a red flag. They go, wait a minute, this isn't okay. Instead of, feeling like adults get to decide for me, other people get to decide for me,
Right.
which leads to kids hiding things that happen to them and feeling pressured by peers or by other adults to do things that they just have that sense of, this doesn't feel good or I'm uncomfortable. And so the conversation of consent is, I think, so powerful because you can start at the youngest age with a child to teach them about their body, how they get to say no. And, I define boundaries as the decisions that define the limits you live by. So we're telling our kids, you get to have limits and they get to be respected. And it's so simple, but it's so profound as they grow up and start to develop, more of a sexuality as they get older.
Yeah, I love it. And fascinates me about the way you raise your kids and the word energy. It, like, you don't shame your kids. You don't act like I'm smarter than you because I'm the adult. Or like the story that's coming up for me is when you were here visiting Terry and I, excuse me, in Asheville, North Carolina with your kids. There's nothing like a Facebook friend showing up in the flesh. Come on, Dorit, come on. Come on. Dorit's in Norway. Stina's in Michigan. It was a little easier. Anyways, and we were downtown and there was some ruckus going on the street and some swearing. And, we just pulled the kids into, or you did really pulled the kids into a store so they weren't hearing it. And then when you were back home, I don't know, probably a few years later even, and your son had heard some like 20-year-olds laughing and joking and using the same cuss word. Would you share that story? Cause how you talked him through that. That was just so fascinating to me. It's always a pleasure to watch you interact with your kids. You've even done that on video, and like everyone who's seen it is like, oh my gosh, that was so cool. When is she writing a book about that?
I'm trying to remember that conversation. You remember my
the
story.
energy of the words, and
yeah,
because it wasn't so much like, okay, he's gonna think this
not
swear
the word.
Hey, it wasn't about the word, and you got him to tap into the energy of the difference. Do you remember that?
Yeah, and that's always been so important to me because I grew up around like what I would consider a normal amount of swearing, and I just knew that like kids weren't supposed to do it. It was, but it was okay for adults. But I just have learned over the years that like you do not have to swear at someone to swear at them.
Right?
You can say very little with very acceptable and appropriate words and deeply hurt someone and be very aggressive or very passive aggressive,
right?
And create so many like toxic communication patterns that way. And so I've always had the mindset of I have to teach my kids what's socially acceptable because they have to function in a world that's not going to be cool with an 11-year-old going around dropping F-bombs, right? Like they have to have the cognitive awareness of how to behave themselves. At the same time, I have taught them that it's just, those are just words, and how you use them matters. We don't say them at people or call people names, but that goes for any word you can choose. When you're talking at someone with aggression or you're talking at someone with a violent energy, it doesn't matter what particular words you're using. And another way that I kind of took the shame out of that was at a moment in the car with my son once, and he asked me like if he could say a swear word or something, and I was asking him questions, and I was like, do you want to say that? Do you want to know what it feels like to say that word? And he was just kind of like, he didn't know. He was a little hesitant. And I said, it's just you and me in the car. I said, this is a safe space. If you just want to know what those words feel like to say, then this is a good time for you to do that. And it was like so liberating for him to be like, oh, I can say the word and like, doom will not instantly befall me, like that.
Right?
That I always remember this story in the Bible where there's like a guy just gets struck dead. He touches something he's not supposed to touch and he just gets struck dead. And I think that there's some of that in the shame of like, what's going to happen if I say this word? And teaching them that there's context, there's appropriate times, there's appropriate people. And I've talked to them about how my relationship and the way I talk to my mom is different than the way that I talk to my sister, is different than the way that I talk to my kids, is different than the way I talk to my spouse.
Right.
And it's not bad or good. It's not right or wrong. It's just human nature. We all do that.
Yeah.
So there's just so many more nuances to teaching them how to like actually be attentive to, like you said, the energy of what they're saying and the energy of a relationship and a conversation, and picking up on those nuances instead of just taking things at like that face value, which going back to consent is if someone is uncomfortable and displaying that, whether they're saying it or not, that is communication and they are not consenting. Unless someone is enthusiastic, if they are eager, if they are, like green lights look like green lights. That's it. Everything else is a yellow light or a red light,
Right? So. Oh, that's good. I love it. Dorit, what comes up for you when you think about even like the word consent and pairing that with sexuality, or I don't know, you got something?
Yeah. What comes up for me is I'm being transported back to my teens.
Okay.
And I actually got raped twice
Oh,
in my
wow.
teens. Yeah. Once was the first time was like a week before I turned 16, and the other one I was around 18. So the whole thing about sensuality, I in that phase I was of course exploring my femininity. I was developing from being a kid to a young woman, and this was in the 80s. So of course you dressed like everyone else dressed, and in the 80s you could kind of put yourself out there a little bit. But so I felt afterwards that it was my fault that I had made this happen because of the way I acted and the way I dressed. I was terribly guilty. I didn't dare saying it to anyone. Because, well, it happened because I was showing my sensuality, and the guy didn't need my consent because I was kind of say, here you go.
Total rape.
I'm open, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, there were never any, well, talk about it. So I carried it around, and the next time it happened, it was a guy that I trusted. I was in a dance group, and we were going to practice, and me and him were going to drive to the venue to practice together, and he just drove into like a deserted parking lot and just helped himself. Yeah, so it all came back, the whole guilt of feeling the guilt of feeling feminine, the guilt of having like a feminine body. I'm very voluptuous with round things everywhere. so I got into hiding myself, just layers and layers, and I looked like a freaking tent because I didn't want anyone to see my sensuality. I didn't want to. Yeah, I got scared of showing that side of me, and that lasted for many years. So I think it's so important what Stina Marie is teaching kids, because I had never been taught that. And even though the second time I tried to kind of say no, I couldn't run. I was in the middle of nowhere. It didn't help what I said or did. So that's just things that kind of comes out of this sensuality and consent word when you put it like that. Yeah.
Wow, what a vulnerable share. Thank you so much, Dora. That is going to help so many people. It's talking about this stuff and getting comfortable enough with who you are to be able to share vulnerably. It's amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, if I can help anyone.
Yeah,
sorry.
That was beautiful.
Yeah, I was just going to add, sexual assault is a sexual assault. So you guys listening in on this, or watching the recording later, or a lady who knows somebody who's a guy who was sexually assaulted, consent is consent. It doesn't change because of your sexual orientation. It does not change, period. Society get to enforce these types of things and reinforce them into our children, like Stina so eloquently talked about earlier. Give them the chance to experience life in a controlled way, so they feel comfortable about that knowledge, rather than having to act it out to figure it out. That's not good. Linda?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, love this. Quite the conversation. Whew. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate this chat.
Hey, these high vibe conversations are starting to move, man. I'm liking these. Thank you, ladies. This is great. Thank you very much.
All right. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.